Let's start with the Sunday Times, Scott.
All right. In the Sunday Times, well, there's a couple of things on the front page. This thing you mentioned about the BBC chairman, I think he's about to be replaced.
Right.
We're at £800,000 loan. So I wish I would have talked to him about getting a loan first before this happened. But anyway, Tavistock scandal is on par with East Germany's doping of athletes, it says in the Sunday Times.
This is the Child Gender Clinic.
It is. A book has been written by a woman who's a Newsnight journalist, and they spoke to dozens of journalists who worked at the Gender Identity Development Service, GIDS, which is part of the Tavistock and Portman NHS Trust. And at that clinic, that service, they helped young people deal with their trans feelings.
Well,
but some of the ways they did it now are seen as circumspect. One was 1,000 children were referred for puberty blockers at the experimental clinic. And they routinely referred under 16s for these blockers, which probably wasn't a great idea. And a lot of these
children as young as 3 were being referred. I mean, I appreciate that, perhaps some people have gender dysphoria and, identify as another gender, and sometimes hormones and surgery and all the rest of it can be the best path for them.
Later.
3?
Yeah, it's a bad idea.
A 3-year-old.
It's a really small number of appointments as well. Sometimes you're reading that people have just been once.
And
made this decision.
And they've given the binder and the whole thing.
Right.
In the book, former clinicians at GIDS service speak for the first time in detail of their regret about the practice of routinely referring under 16s, as you said, for puberty blocking and cross-hormone treatment with no concrete data on long-term effects. They were guinea pigs.
Yeah.
They were experimenting.
Except they're not even recording the data to find out how many of them detransition, how many of them regret it, and there are thousands. There's class action.
Yeah, a lot of kids do regret it.
Against the Tavistock, and it's been closed down, and now
thankfully,
it's going to be treated a different way. But it sounds awful. They're making so much money. Apparently, 30%. 30% of the money for this NHS trust came from the Tavistock clinic, I believe. One of the revelations.
You can make a lot of money on people's misery. When people are vulnerable, as young people almost always are, and very young people are, when they're fragile, when they're wondering what's going to happen next, it sounds like they pounce. I hate to speak negatively about the NHS. They saved my life in 2013, but it does sound in this case like this went almost unchecked by outside clinicians.
Cressida, I mean, are you surprised that giving drugs to children and then mutilating their genitals turned out to not always be the best course of action?
I'm not surprised. I think what's really sad is that so many of these people, they're saying a lot of the children have got autistic traits, and if they've just been left alone, given some therapy, some talking therapy, but you don't make as much money, I guess, out of talking therapy.
And I think the parents, we've discovered, some of the parents didn't want their kids to be gay. So in the interim, what they decided to do was change the gender.
Well, indeed, and this is what happens in Iran.
Yes,
Iran has got one of the highest rates of gender transitioning in the world. And it's because it's illegal to be gay.
Well, they tell you we're going to kill you or change your gender. Which choice do you make? And I think these kids felt as though, obviously, doctors are telling them something, their parents are telling them something. They felt under a lot of pressure. And, of course, they caved and they did what they were told. They took pills. They wore the binder. They had surgery. They had their breasts removed. They had mastectomies at the age of 12
well,
and 13.
But you would, wouldn't you? Because when you're very young and you feel lost, some people become goths. It's not
the only other option. The terrible story.
Thank God the NHS wasn't, surgically transitioning people to being goths. That would have been a whole...
when I was young...
eyeshadow.
When I was 14, we changed schools and we moved to the countryside, so I had to get home on my own at night. And I was hitchhiking and I met a lot of people that way. And I was very vulnerable. I feel like I'm lucky to be alive, And I know what it's like to be vulnerable and knowing that you're not... What you're feeling, what you're thinking is not maybe normal in a good or a bad way, or it's just different and you want it to change. You want to be like everybody else. And suddenly you're in the care of this person and you do what you're told. It's terrible.
But you'd hope at least a state institution would treat you better than somebody picks you up hitchhiking. Which the NHS doesn't seem to have done in this case.
They didn't buy anyone a free meal like some of those guys did with me. Nice. A couple lines of coke.
Anyway,